Good evening. Welcome to the Salem Area Mass Transit District's Board of Directors virtual meeting for Thursday, January 28th, 2021. It's a little after 6:30 and we're just getting started. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Governor Brown's executive order to keep the community safe during the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, public access to this meeting has been provided both with CC Media on our Facebook page, on Comcast Cable Channel 21, and also on YouTube. And with that, I'll go ahead and note that we do have quorum, so we can proceed with our events or with our agenda. And the next item is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will go ahead and lead us in that now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now we'll have our safety moment provided by our general manager.
Thank you. I have two safety moments for this evening. The first is around the COVID-19 vaccine. It is still with us. And so the best thing that individuals can do for themselves and others is to practice the governor's 3 W's of washing your hands, watch your distance, and wear your mask. And the other is, as we all saw the other night, we had a snowstorm. And so if you haven't already, I would encourage you to prepare your vehicles and your homes for winter weather because it is with us.
Great, thank you. We don't have any announcements or changes to the agenda, but I'll take an opportunity to see if any board members have any conflicts of interest for any item on the agenda that they would like to flag at this time. Okay, not seeing any. We'll proceed to public comment. We've not received any public comment through either postal mail or email up until this point. There's no member of the public present, and I don't believe we have any members of the public on the Google Meet presently, though if there are any, please speak up now if you'd like to make public comment. Okay. I would like to note that several weeks ago, I want to acknowledge that we as a board received a letter from a transit operator sharing concerns about an increase in verbal and physical confrontations with the public at the downtown transit center. And after receiving it, I asked General Manager Pollock to respond to the concerns and provide that to the board, which board members did receive along with the letter. And I want to speak directly to this transit operator who was anonymous, but I wanted to say thank you for sharing your concerns, and that if you'd like to meet with me one-on-one, I'd be happy to do that. Please reach out to General Manager Pollock and we can arrange a time for us to meet. So hopefully you heard this message, but anyways, thank you. So with that, we'll go ahead to the consent calendar. So if there are no concerns with the items on the consent calendar, does somebody have a motion? Director Bush.
I was waiting. Okay, I would move to adopt the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Welcome to a new member. After we vote, of course.
Ms. Galeazzi, could you call the roll for a vote?
Hi, Director Nguyen?
Aye.
Director Bush?
Aye.
Director Carney?
Aye.
Director Inosa Pressy?
Aye.
Director Davidson?
Aye.
Director Krebs,
Aye.
Director Richards, Director Richards.
Aye.
Thank you. It's unanimous.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we'll proceed to our action items on the agenda, which the first of which is the adoption of the proposed 2021 federal and state legislative agendas. General Manager.
Yeah, thank you. So before I turn this over for Linda, was that Dale Penn? You just let it?
I don't see him.
Okay, okay, he's trying to get on, and I guess he's being asked to join, and no one's admitting.
Oh, okay.
If you could admit him, please.
I
So let me turn this over to Director Bush, who will be presenting the staff report.
Thank you, Alan. I'm honored to do this. I just want to thank President Davidson for the opportunity to present the 2021 federal and state legislative agenda for the district. First, again, I'd like to acknowledge our legislative committee, which met on the 14th, and we spent an hour working through this and fine-tuning some things, and I'm sure we'll have a great discussion afterwards. Thank you for your hard work, and as we ironed out the priorities for Cherriots. I'd also like to acknowledge our advocates, Kirby Garrett and Dale Penn, for our federal and legislative partners with CFM, keep us up to date. So we annually adopt a legislative agenda to set direction for legislative activities. The agenda is used as a guide when responding to legislative matters and as a communication tool with legislators and other interested parties. On the 14th, our legislative committee met to develop the proposed legislative agenda for the district in conjunction with staff and representatives of CFM advocates, our district's legislative consultant, And the proposed 2021 federal and state legislative agendas are included as attachments A and B, respectively. The proposed agenda identifies legislative priorities and projects for annual appropriations and grant opportunities. So I will turn it over to Mr. Garrett and Mr. Penn.
All right. Well, Dale, I think you were able to get on, right?
I am fine. I'm on now.
All right. Well, it looks like we've got the federal PowerPoint up there, so I can go ahead and kick things off if that works for everybody. So yeah, good evening, board members. Pleasure to be with you. Greetings from Washington, D.C. My wife just told me it's past my bedtime, but with COVID, this is about the most exciting thing I've had going on a weekday evening in quite a while. So I'm excited to be with you all. Wish I could be there in person. I look forward to resuming normalcy here, hopefully later this year at some point. But again, very excited to be here virtually to present the 2021 federal agenda that we've been working with Alan and all of your staff to put together. And just again, my name is Kirby Garrett. I serve as CFM's Vice President of Federal Affairs back here in DC, where we are very proud to represent Cherriots on all things federal. So if we could go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So just to provide a brief overview here before I dive in, I just wanted to kick things off by going over what we've been working on the past couple years and the recent successes we've had together at the federal level. Then I'll pivot to grant projects and funding requests that we have on the federal agenda, walk through the policy priorities we have, and then I'll provide a quick summary of where things stand back here in DC following the election, and then pull out the crystal ball and try to tell you what we expect to happen on the Hill here in the coming weeks and and months in the first 100 days of President Biden's administration. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. So recent successes. So we have enjoyed a great partnership over the years with your staff, including from the board to your staff all the way from bottom to top. And we're really proud of that partnership and the record of success it has produced. There's a long list of wins that we could put on here going back quite a few years now in our partnership together, but I just wanted to focus on the past few years here for just a little bit, most recent 3 or 4 years. So most recently, we have successfully competed for federal funds to provide Cherriots with 11 new buses out of FTA's Bus and Bus Facility Competitive Grant Program. First in 2018, we worked with your team on an application to the Federal Transit Administration's Bus and Bus Facility Grant Program, which is a pot of money that is significantly oversubscribed, which I'll talk about later. And we requested 6 CNG replacement vehicles. That was a successful request. We worked with your staff to form that request, draft the grant proposal, actually get in there and write the narrative. And then once it was submitted, work with the congressional delegation to secure letters of support and their advocacy and outreach to the administration in support of the application. And then just last year, a project we're really, really excited about, as I know you guys are as well. We worked with your staff to help lead an application to the Federal Transit Administration's Low or No Emissions Grant Program, which makes awards for projects, as people who are not familiar might guess, low or no emissions projects. This program is extremely competitive and even more oversubscribed than the general pot of the Bus and Bus Facility Program that we pursued the CNG buses from. But you guys had a great project and a great story to tell. And so we worked with you all to tell that story in the grant narrative, and then to FTA and to the congressional delegation. The whole concept of an electric bus corridor connecting residents to your highest demand stops, shopping destinations, centers of employment, was just a very compelling project. And so, we worked again with your staff from beginning to end to analyze the NOFA, frame and scope that project to be as competitive as possible, and then actually, draft the responses in the grant narrative. And of course, we had phenomenal assistance and partnership with your staff. A lot of hard work from Alan, Dave Trimble, Melissa Kidd, Tricia Bunsen, Greg Thompson, and many, many others that I could name. But so we worked to submit that grant. After it was submitted, again, worked with the congressional delegation to, explain what the project was to them, convey the benefits, and secure their letters of support and outreach from their offices. And then it's just in May of this year that FTA announced projects from that program and announced that they would be awarding Salem the full $3.6 million requested, which was one of just 41 awards nationwide, and will mark the very first battery electric buses to be entering the Cherriots fleet. And so the congressional delegation was ecstatic about this. They were very proud to have supported the project. And so in total, between those projects and just the past few years, we've been really proud to notch those wins and be able to report a return on investment of about 28 to 1. Again, this is something we're really proud of. Generally, with our clients at the federal level, we strive for something in the range of 10 to 15 to 1. So you guys are doing really well, and we're very proud of that, nearly doubling it at 30 to 1. So that's also just on direct competitive grant awards that you guys have received. It doesn't include some of the other wins we've been able to secure, going down to the next item of COVID relief. Following the start of the pandemic, we spent a lot of time coordinating and communicating with the congressional delegation in support of coronavirus relief funding to, address the significant costs and revenue decreases that you all were facing and continue to face. We stayed, in touch with the congressional delegation throughout to convey, all the measures you guys were taking to do enhanced cleaning, how ridership declines were affecting your bottom line and your revenue. And the delegation really appreciated this info, and I think was very effective for them to be armed with that information, as they really did step up this year to advocate for funding for you guys and to support transit systems from the federal level. So As a result of that, there was money included in the CARES Act, which was the coronavirus relief bill you probably know passed back in May, and then also the coronavirus relief bill that was passed just recently in December. Overall, from those two bills, Salem received or set to receive about a little over $28 million. But there's certainly work left to do there, and I'll get to that in a slide or two. We were also very successful in securing plus-ups for the bus and bus facility program. This is something we have been very successful at over the past few years of securing additional money through the annual appropriations bills for those pots of money that Salem is pursuing those grant funds from that support exactly like the zero emission bus project and the CNG bus replacement. So, for a total, you can see we've secured $1.65 billion. And just for reference, so in fiscal year 2021, so this fiscal year, funding would have, for bus and bus facility programs, would have been at about 800 million, 808 to be specific. But with that plus up, it takes it all the way up to 2.2 billion for this year. So this is hugely helpful. As I said, it coordinates, to or corresponds directly to the projects that you guys are pursuing. More money and those pots of funding means a higher chance of success when we're going after these grant projects. Also been in of tax it. Unfortunately, consistent lapse now. Time we've been it's a retro to continue extension about just going to reinstating this each time. But anyways, over the years, this is about $170,000 per year that Cherriots benefits from this provision. So, going back 4 years, that totals about $680,000 for you guys. Finally is an item that is, still in the works, but we were able to secure an increase of bus funding in Chairman Peter DeFazio's transportation bill that passed the House this summer. We secured a level of funding in there that would increase bus funding by 2.7 times what it's at right now, which is just a huge increase. We worked very, very closely with Congressman DeFazio and his staff. Lots of meetings with them discussing this and how to include that. So we really have to commend their leadership, the congressman, his staff on the committee, and his personal office, and just their advocacy for this increase in funding. Obviously, this bill did not advance any further than the House. The Senate did not take it up last year, but this is kind of the baseline that Congress will be working off of this year as they get going on a transportation bill. So it's a huge, helpful step in the process, and we're excited to be hopefully capitalize on that in the year ahead. So with that, we can turn to the next slide. So now turning to your federal agenda. So there's kind of two parts to it. There, like I said, there's the funding requests, which is your grant projects here, and then there's the policy items, which I'll get to in just 1 second. So these right here are the funding requests that we'll be working on this year, some of which we plan to move forward with applications to the bus and bus facility program again. Others are probably a year or two too early to be applying for grant funds. But just because of discussion back here in DC on the possibility of reinstating earmarks, we thought it would be a good idea this year to add some of these additional projects to the agenda, just so that we could be putting those on the congressional delegation's radar and have them ready to go should that opportunity arise through the appropriations legislation or through a surface transportation bill reauthorization, both of which there's a possibility for earmarks to return and could be a good opportunity to take advantage for your project. So the first we have here is the Kubler Link Job Center Mobility Project, $510,000. So this project here would include 6 smaller vans and buses to right size fit a new route from South Salem to East Salem and the job centers there, where, as you guys know, there's currently no direct access. The project would boost mobility, increase opportunity for low income and minority populations, which aligns very well with exactly what the new administration will be focusing on. So that's something we are, think can be placed in a very competitive spot, just given the political dynamics back here in DC, and we look forward to advocating for. We also have 5.0 emission buses on the agenda again. So for additional battery electric buses to continue to fulfill Cherriots' goal of electrification of the fleet. These would replace older diesel buses. Again, an environmentally friendly, sustainable project that aligns well with the administration's priorities and the Low-No grant program that we were successful in just this past year. We also have 10 ADA Paratransit Bus Replacements. This is a project we also were pursuing this past year, and we'll continue to push for those vehicles. And then these are two new ones we have on here as well. An Operations and Maintenance Center, a $20 million request. So this one, we know it's probably not going to be ready to go after a federal grant proposal through the Conventional Bus and Bus Facility grant program. But that just because there's this potential opportunity through earmarks, we thought this would be a good one to start talking with the delegation about, in case there's an avenue to insert this in the transportation reauthorization bill. As you're probably familiar, this would be a new O&M center that would better suit the whole size of your fleet, including new battery electric buses that you will be continuing to add, as well as the infrastructure that all of those require, and overall would increase sustainability and decrease costs by reducing your need to shuttle vehicles back and forth between other facilities. And then lastly, we have the South Salem Mobility as a Service Transit Facility. So this is a very cool, innovative idea. $9.5 million request would allow for multiple size and types of mobility service with a series of small facilities that collectively would boost access through the community to major destinations. So that's an exciting project. Again, we will be looking for multiple opportunities to push each of these, and we'll be advocating for all of them. So that is a wrap on the grant projects. We can turn to the next slide. So here we have your policy initiatives, the second half of the agenda. So I want to provide a little bit of context here before I dive into the items we've outlined on the left-hand side. And so if you'll bear with me and look at these graphs over here on the right, there are obviously a lot of squiggly lines. Hopefully people can see that virtually up close enough to make a little bit of sense out of it. But basically, this tells the story, as we see it, of bus transit from the federal funding perspective for the last 10 years. So if you're looking at the chart on the top right, the blue line that you see, dip and then kind of recover, that represents bus and bus facility funding. The red line represents the New Starts CIG funding that supports rail and rapid transit. And then the yellow is the State of Good Repair that program that funds larger urban systems. And then, of course, the black line in the middle is your x-axis. Basically, what that represents is the baseline of where bus funding was, all these programs were, back in 2012 before the MAP 21 transportation bill was passed. That bill was an utter disaster for bus systems. Bus funding took a 57% cut under that bill, while, as you can see, New Starts and rail received increases. And not only was bus funding cut, but it was formalized. And so basically, Salem couldn't compete for these larger grants to support your grant applications. You only got a simple formula allotment of $500,000 a year or so, which, as you guys know, is probably not even enough to buy a bus, certainly not anything other than diesel. So this is the reason why, as a quick aside, Salem joined the Bus Coalition because of these cuts. This is a national association of transit agencies that we also represent, which is focused solely on federal bus funding. And so we are proud to lobby on behalf of them. It also helps us put Cherriots and your guys' priorities at the forefront of all of these conversations as well. So back to the graph. MAP 2021 was a 2-year bill. So we worked with Salem, with you guys, and with the Bus Coalition throughout the next reauthorization, which was called the FAST Act. And we were successful in getting a pretty huge plus up, which you can see that line, that blue line there in the top right graph start to trend upwards. And you can see the other programs didn't quite have the same success. So we've made a lot of progress here, but you can see we still have a ways to get back to that baseline. And it's worth noting amidst these cuts to bus funding what's happened to bus systems. So following those cuts, buses operating past their useful life throughout the country has increased by 41%. And buses operating past 15 years, as you can see there on the right, have increased by 82%. That's pretty crazy when you think about the state of the nation's bus fleet and the effect that bus transit funding has had on that. So basically, the story that we're telling on the Hill is the overall impact on fleet size, which you can see in the chart below. It is the exact same years. And so you can compare how those cuts in funding have affected the age and mileage of buses across the country, and also ridership in general. Basically, what it translates to is almost 17,000 buses being taken off the street, a 26% decline in fleet size, and a 16% decline in ridership. Just to put that in perspective again, there used to be 75,000 buses on the road in 2012. Following the cuts, that has decreased now to 58,000. Again, a 26% decrease. So, one of the big questions in the transit world is why ridership has declined. And, sure, there's multiple factors involved. There's Uber and lower gas prices and all that. But to us, it's pretty clear that there's been, a significant reduction in bus funding, and that's translated directly to a reduction in the quality of buses out on the road and the number of buses. And as you would expect, that would translate to a decrease in ridership as well. So all of that just as context, we can turn back to the agenda items. This is why we're really focusing on bus and bus facility funding to support the availability of funds for you guys to pursue to restore your fleet and achieve expansions as well. So we have a lot of work to do. The FAST Act reauthorization, or FAST Act, expires this year following a 1-year extension they passed last year. Our request that we will be pushing is a return to what they call the 40-40-20 ratio split between those 3 programs I talked about. And what that would do is restore the pre-MAP 21 ratio of funding, and then provide a level of funding that would allow everyone to replace outdated buses and then also modernize and expand service. In tandem with that, we're requesting a $432 million plus up through the annual appropriations bill. We're hopeful that this request will be included within the surface transportation reauthorization bill, and we won't have a need for it, but we want to be pushing that through the annual process just in case Congress fails to pass a new transportation bill. And then also, finally, under bus and bus facility funding, we have, in case Congress includes this in a larger infrastructure package, which is very possible, we have a request of $13.45 billion, which would replace all buses operating past their useful life and replace facilities that have fallen out of a state of good repair, and do that all with 100% federal funding ratio. So that's it for bus and bus facility funding. As I mentioned earlier, we have also been advocating for COVID relief dollars, and we'll be continuing to push that. Obviously, your system has, had incurred a lot of costs to address the pandemic, as have other systems across the country. And so we will be advocating for additional federal COVID relief to help sustain your operations and ensure that you guys are able to continue providing your essential service now through the pandemic and after, once we're out of this. Finally, the alternative fuels tax credit. We will be continuing to advocate for an extension. It expires again at the end of 2021 following the most recent extension in December. And so we'll be arguing or advocating for a permanent extension of that tax credit. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So I'll go through this quickly. As you guys may or may not have heard, there was an election in November. The quick story is that Democrats now control both chambers, the House and the Senate, but they control them by the very slightest of margins. It literally could not be any tighter in the Senate, where it is a 50-50 split, and only broken because of the Vice President, Kamala Harris, giving Democrats control in that chamber. And in the House, Democrats retained control, but they lost seats. And so they now have the slimmest majority that a governing party has had in the House for decades. So what does all of that mean for the coming couple of years and for governing? It is going to be very, very difficult. Both leaders can not afford to lose, hardly any members from either the progressive wing of the caucus or the moderate wing. And so any legislation that is pushed or advanced has to be extremely carefully calculated to make sure they maintain that whole base of support to retain a majority to get it approved. And that's, of course, not even getting into the details of the filibuster and the need to, secure 10 Republican votes for most bills moving in the Senate. So we can go to the next slide. So with that as context, we are now a few days into President Biden's first 100 days, whereas, as you guys know, there's always a concerted push to use his political capital, the president's political capital, to get things done. The administration basically has two items of focus. I was actually on a call with the White House staff today where they were addressing county leaders across the country, and as they outline it, their first item of business is a rescue bill, and the second is their recovery bill in the context of coronavirus. So basically, the first item they plan on pushing is President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. You can see the major items listed there. $20 billion for transit, which is the COVID relief dollars we'll be pushing for. We may even be pushing for a larger number than that based on the need that's assessed out in the country. You can see $1,400 direct payments to individuals, $350 billion in coronavirus relief funding, which would go to state and local governments, $400 billion for vaccine rollout, health and testing, $440 billion additional small business support, the $15 an hour minimum wage, unemployment benefit extension of supercharged benefits, and then the eviction moratorium extension and rental assistance. There's a whole lot of other things in there, but those are the main pieces. And then, so that's item number one that they'll be focusing on here in the next even week or two is when we'll start to see action on this. Item number two is an infrastructure package, which will probably closely resemble what House Democrats approved last summer. It's going to be big, it's going to be widely scoped, and there will certainly be opportunities for transit in there. We also expect this to include and to a certain extent largely be centered around the pending transportation reauthorization bill that I was talking about earlier in the presentation, which is hugely important for the transit world and you guys. On both of these items, much to the chagrin of progressives in the Democratic Party, Biden very much wants to work, at least try to work, on a bipartisan basis. I think that, my personal assessment is that he genuinely wants to, but I think there's also, certainly a political calculation there as well, where he knows that if he's not able to work on a bipartisan basis on these initial items, then that's going to, undermine the faith and goodwill and make it more challenging to get Republican votes to support other things he wants to do in the coming days and months and years. such as an infrastructure package, where he's going to need votes to help push that across the finish line. That is basically, though, where this concept of budget reconciliation comes in, which you've probably heard. It's the buzzword back here in DC, certainly. It is complicated, but it's essentially a way that the Senate can get around the filibuster and pass legislation on a simple majority, which, as we looked at the Senate map, they can do. So the problem with reconciliation, though, is there are a lot of restrictions on what can be included. It's a complicated process, and it takes a lot of time to advance. Typically, transit funding would not be something that would be considered eligible for inclusion due to again, this could be, could give another hour-long presentation on what the rules of budget reconciliation, but typically transit funding wouldn't be included in that. However, it is basically subject to the Senate parliamentarian on what is eligible and what's not, which the Senate technically has control over through their rules and could make changes to if they really wanted to. So all goes to say there is a lot of uncertainty, and it's going to be a wild ride here in the next couple of months. But there is certainly going to be opportunities for pursuing Cherriots projects and your priorities. And by the way, all of the stuff going on in the first 100 days will be happening amidst the impeachment trial. So on that happy note, I'm happy to take any questions on the federal side of the agenda.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Garrett?
I have one, Ian. And that's just, I know we have heard this information before, but if Alan or Mr. Garrett could remind us what we can use the COVID relief funding for in terms of operations, capital investments, any kind of flexibility in there, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so I'll take this one. So it is a very flexible funding source. We can use it for operations, for capital, whatever we deem appropriate. And the important piece of that, it is a no match required, so we can use 100% of it without having to have a match. So we have been using ours so far for the unforeseen expenses as a result of COVID, as well as payroll and salaries for employees, so we can maintain the workforce without having to lay anyone off.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Director Bush.
I don't know if I missed it, but did you talk about the earmarks at all? I think it might have flown by me.
Yeah. I guess I kind of glossed over that a little bit on the last slide. Basically, there has been a lot of talk, especially at the end of 2020, in Democratic leadership, especially on the House side, about returning earmarks, to Congress, which have been banned since 2010. And they're obviously, there's bipartisan condemnation of how earmarks were used in the past and the types of projects they supported, and just kind of fraud and abuse and whatnot. So there's a desire, though, to bring those back in some limited form with more transparency and again, on a more limited basis. However, that was something they were talking a lot about at the end of 2020. We have not yet seen it come to fruition yet, though there is still certainly a chance that it could come back either in the annual appropriations bills that Congress passes each year to fund the government, including transportation programs, but also in the reauthorization of the FAST Act, the transportation bill. So either of those could be opportunities that Cherriots could pursue to fund some of the funding projects that we have on that list. So that's something that, again, we're watching very closely back here to see if that does come to fruition. But we just want to have those projects ready and in front of your congressional delegation, so they know what you would want to take advantage of if that opportunity arises. Does that provide enough background? Let me know if you have any additional questions on it.
No, that works. Thank you.
You bet.
Could I springboard off Director Bush's question and just ask a follow-up? So if I'm understanding earmarks at a federal level, if I were to make a state equivalent, would I say Christmas tree bill, or would that be inaccurate?
Dale, do you want to chime in on that one? Yeah.
Sorry, Director Carney, can you repeat that question, please?
My question was, if I were to understand the way earmarks function at a federal level, would I say the Christmas tree bill if I were to understand it in terms of state government?
I think it's probably as accurate a comparison as we can make. Yes, Director Carney.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Mhm.
okay. Forgive my ignorance. I don't know what you mean when you're talking about the Christmas tree bill. Can you explain it?
Yes, thank you for the question, Director Bush. So in Oregon, our budget process starts when the governor releases her governor's recommended budget in November, December, and it proceeds through the entirety of the legislative session and really picks up towards the last few weeks of session when final budget decisions are made in massive budget bills for the agencies, and then in a couple significant budget bills right at the end. And these final budget bills are, one of them in particular is nicknamed the Christmas tree bill, because there are quite a few ornaments of budget allocations that are hung on this bill in order to get us out of session.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Garrett? Okay. Mr. Garrett, thank you so much for the services you and your office provide, especially on the federal level. It's awesome to see it all on one slide, just some of the recent wins that we've had. So thank you for all of the hard work that you do for us.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Thank you to all of you for all of your hard work. Appreciate it.
And then, Mr. Penn, I believe you are up next.
All right, well, perfect. Thank you very much. And that's a hard act to follow. Kirby did a great job providing a overview of the services provided at the federal level. I will do my best to describe the services that we provide at the state level. So my name is Dale Penn. I'm the State Affairs Partner for CFM. And we've been in operation for since 1990. We've provided state, federal, crisis communication, public affairs, local support for a variety of clients since 1990. We are very pleased at the state level and the federal level to represent Salem-Keizer Area Mass Transit, Salem Area Mass Transit District. So I wanted to, if we could go to the next slide, just do a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. I would chat for a minute about our state affairs team. Since I presented to you last, we have had, I think, a new team member join. I want to make sure that we introduce you to that individual. Talk a little bit about the impact that COVID's had at the state level. Kirby did a great job talking about the impact of COVID at the federal level. And then also want to talk about kind of the 2020 special sessions, the 2021 legislative outlook, and just have a conversation about what we can expect in session this year, which has already started, mind you. We could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is our outlook for our team this year. As you can see, we have multiple individuals there. Myself, Dale Penn, Tess Melio, Zach Reeves, and our new member is Waylon Buchan. And so Waylon is a fantastic individual with a background in transportation, both with the agency, with ODOT, and then also in the lobby world. And so Waylon brings a ton of experience. He's a lawyer by training as well. And he has already started working pretty heavily on the legislative concepts that we have in play, and the advocacy that we have in the building. So let's go to the next slide real quickly. Thank you very much. So let's talk for a minute about the 2021 legislative session. So we have already started session. We have a constitutionally limited 160-day long session in the odd numbered years like 2021. It kicked off Monday, January 19th. And while because of the presidential swearing in, and the threats potentially of violence over last week, we pushed off a lot of the starting ceremony stuff and initial public hearings until this week. So this week has been very hectic. This is going to look like no other session that we've had ever because of the pandemic. More than 3,000 bills are expected to formally be introduced over the next few weeks. We started out with about 1,800 bills right at the onset, and then we expect, like I said, to get up to 3,000. Just as a comparison, you would think that in a year when we have COVID, when we have wildfires, when we have the social justice conversation, that we would have legislators who would introduce maybe a few less bills. That is not the case. In the last long session, 2019, we had 2,768 bills introduced. We expect to eclipse that this year. So during the interim, Capitol staff, legislative leadership, they worked to develop a framework of what session will look like. And when we talk about virtual session, it is expected to continue for several weeks, if not months. We do not expect daily floor sessions for legislators to begin until at the beginning, most likely late March or early April. And really the Capitol being closed to the public is really tied to the local county's risk level, Marion County's risk level. That's going to be monitored weekly, and plans will constantly shift around that. And eventually what we hope is that as more herd immunity occurs and people are vaccinated and the numbers of COVID transmission decrease, that we may actually be able to have some semblance of in-person legislative hearings, floor sessions and whatnot for the public, the press, advocates, everyone by the end of session, but we just don't know. So it's something we're going to be tracking very closely. So this year we have Democratic control, supermajority, very similar to what we had the last time we talked about a long session. There are 37 Democrats in the House out of 60, 18 Democrats in the Senate out of 30. That gives them the ability to truly pass just about anything they want, with the exception of needing a couple Republicans in both chambers for quorum rules. And we've talked about in the past the impact of quorum on session. Republicans have only a few tools in their tool belt available with those numbers to influence policy and budget. And one of the most powerful is to deny a quorum. And that is to leave the building, potentially leave the state, which has happened in the recent past. And the result being very little being able to be done. In order to move anything on the calendar on the House or the Senate, you need a certain number of legislators on the floor. And right now, Republicans have the ability to stop that. In years past, they've used that to great effect in opposition to cap and trade legislation, gun control legislation, several other topics. Is there going to be a bill this year that would push them to walk out again? We don't know yet. We think there are conversations happening about that. There are several different types of bills that could influence their decision, but we just don't know yet. So what are some of the big topics that we can expect to see this year? COVID-19 response is definitely one of them. both from the healthcare side, how it impacts different industries, how the state reacts to that, is all going to be under discussion. In fact, there is a subcommittee in the House Healthcare Committee focused entirely on COVID-19. So those committees are meeting regularly, and they are hearing from individuals from the healthcare community, from BIPOC communities on the impact of COVID, and all sorts of topics regarding vaccine distribution, vaccine hesitancy, numbers. It's a very fascinating time to listen to some of these stories and the impact of the vaccine on the state. We're also going to be talking about social justice, equity, and for the most part, almost everything that will move through the legislative session this year will need to do so through a lens of social justice. If you bring a bill forward, a policy bill or budget or otherwise, you should be prepared to have a conversation on how that policy or budget impacts BIPOC communities. That's a direction that we have gotten from both leadership, from both the Senate and the House, and from the governor herself. So that is something that is incredibly important going forward. Another big issue that we have to deal with is wildfire recovery and how that impacted our communities right around this area. Cherriots served a vital role during wildfire recovery, moving people, supplies, and that has had a significant impact on our local community in the Willamette Valley. So there are several bills dealing with wildfire recovery, several budget items that we will continue to track. And then the last thing I'll mention is redistricting. So every 10 years, the legislature is responsible for drawing congressional and state legislative district lines. The Secretary of State draws the boundaries that the legislature fails, which has often happened in the past. Oregon is likely to gain one additional congressional seat with these numbers. And so this role is even more important now. In the past, what has happened as it is going on now, there's usually a redistricting committee in both chambers that's identified and sat, and then they meet regularly through session, and that's happening right now. So the last thing I'll mention on this slide before we move on is leadership for our policy and leadership for the building. Our own Senator Salem area legislator Peter Courtney is serving his 10th term as the Senate president. I think that's definitely a record. He's an institution in the building. He's very much focused on trying to have as much bipartisanship as possible. He doesn't like moving bills that only have Democrat votes. And then we have Speaker Katina Kotek, who emerged from a potential Democratic challenger for the speaker role to her 5th term as speaker. So we have 2 veteran lawmakers who are leading both chambers of the Capitol, meaning their staff, and they know the ins and outs of the building. They know how things work. And that stability, I think, is a key factor going into a very hectic session. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that we've never talked about before. And so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So in this one, we want to talk about our Cherriots legislative priorities. I want to stop for a second and see if anyone has questions regarding the 2021 legislative session. Okay.
I have a quick question, Dale. Sorry, I had to
Sure.
turn my camera off.
problem.
Just momentarily. I'm looking at OLIS right now and I'm trying to figure out who is on the redistricting committee. Can you help me figure out where I would find that?
Yes. So thank you for the question, Director Carney. So if you go to the committees, the House is going to have its own redistricting committee. It's not a joint committee. The Senate has their own separate redistricting committee. The House redistricting committee is led by Representative Andrea Salinas, who in my opinion is one of the smartest, most effective lawmakers in either chamber. And then Senator Kathleen Taylor, also incredibly smart and effective, is leading the conversation on the Senate side.
I see it now. I found it. I was looking under joint committees, so thank you.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. When they announced that they were going to be doing redistricting committees again, that's where I looked to first time. So, okay. Any other
Dan,
questions? Yes.
in that same vein, I'm just curious, 2011 was done in a joint way. Was there any reason or rationale why they chose to parse it out in two different chambers?
I don't know for certain why the decision. Something I can look into and get back to the board.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on to our legislative priorities. As Director Bush had mentioned earlier, I was watching on the Facebook feed before I got on here. And so I heard there's conversation around the Legislative Committee meeting and adopting their priority list. And that's where we are right now in the agenda. So we have a few key items. We only have a couple priority ones and a couple priority twos. We have a very important visitor in the meeting. So is that the first committee hearing for for baby Carney? All right, apologies. So the Cherriots legislative priorities, we have only a couple level ones, and then we have several level twos and threes. Number one, which is a perpetual priority for Cherriots, is protecting transit investments as a result of House Bill 2017 from the 2017 session. So we work with the Oregon Transit Association, ODOT, other transit providers, their representation, stakeholders. We work very closely to preserve and maintain the funding for public transportation investments. That was a massive undertaking, and really much of the success goes towards Cherriots, especially Alan, for coming to meeting after meeting after meeting during the 2017 session, when we hammered out detail after detail, spending hours in evening hours working diligently over what those transit investments look like and how they're doled out. So protecting those investments, which took years of conversation, years of advocacy to implement, conversations with the communities impacted by transit, getting their support, conversations with both Republican and Democrat legislators to support those investments. It was a massive undertaking. Protecting that is going to be our number one priority going forward. Cherriots provides incredibly vital services to the citizens within Salem, Kaiser, and the surrounding areas, and we need to do our best to protect those investments. The first year in 2018, 1 year after the bill was signed, we had to protect against sweeping parts of this fund for other things. That's just going to be a perpetual challenge and a priority. It's a good problem to have. The other number one priority that I wanted to focus on is House Bill 3056. This is a bill, or a concept, I should say, that we have talked about before in the past, taking clean fuels credits exchange into the legislature. So as many members of the board may remember, several years ago, Cherriots was the recipient of two energy incentive tax credits. Those EITCs were about $5.5 to $6 million. They were valued in those 2 years that you obtained them at about 98 cents on the dollar, meaning it was almost impossible to sell those to a taxable entity and receive money for operations or whatever you needed. And as a reminder, you obtained these tax credits because you were able to show that that you were providing a service that yielded some amount of savings. This is the Energy Incentive Tax Credit Program, and you were providing a substantial energy savings or reduction of at least 10% in the energy used by the transit service compared to the equivalent energy use of a single occupancy vehicle. You proved that, you received your tax credits and were unable to sell them. We've been sitting on them. We tried to fix this in the legislature multiple times. Unfortunately, whenever you try to fix a tax credit issue outside of the year it was given, it has a revenue impact on the state. It's not an elevator speech conversation. It's incredibly complicated. And the whole subject matter of energy incentive tax credits can get a little scary with the legislature. So we came up with an innovative idea to convert the existing tax credits into clean fuels credits. And Cherriots is one of the first adopters of the Clean Fuels program as a transit agency. Or you, I should say, utilize it now. And we built a legislative concept around that idea with similar goals in mind, the Clean Fuels program and what we were able to demonstrate to get those tax credits. Could we convert those in some manner to clean energy credits and then sell them on the marketplace? What that would end up resulting in, hopefully, is if a 1-to-1 ratio was allowed, it would print somewhere between $5 to $6 million for Cherriots. The benefit of that is being able to take that money for whatever issues Cherriots needs to utilize those dollars for. And right now, COVID relief, protecting you during an incredibly challenging time, and then also potentially on, how do we electrify your fleet? And so those conversations we are having with legislators. Our goal at the time, the 3056 was just introduced this week. It was placed in the Joint Transportation Committee, and both Waylon and I and Alan have had multiple conversations with the legislators in the Salem area who are very supportive of this idea, and we hope to have that conversation at the legislature in the coming weeks, and we'll continue to provide updates on that. But that's our other number one priority issue in the building. The other thing we're going to be monitoring, this one gets more and more complicated, is around the COVID-19 impact on transit and vaccines in particular. So the CDC and the federal government has indicated to the states that they believe that the 1A population who should have primary access to the vaccine should be hospital workers, long-term care workers, the individuals in those facilities, their caregivers. And then you should move to what's called 1B population. And in some states, that's exactly what's happened. In Oregon, there are other entities that have been placed between the 1A and the 1B population. The federal government has indicated that transit workers, considered a vital essential service, should be considered 1B and should be prioritized for vaccine distribution. And we are doing our due diligence with the governor's office and the vaccine advisory committee that she put together to try and make that argument as well. Because we know that the individuals providing services at Cherriots, the bus drivers, the individuals who get people from point A to point B, sometimes those are hospital workers, sometimes those are long-term care workers. We need to protect those drivers and that staff as well. Another issue that I wanted to bring up that is a level 2 priority is electric vehicles. We're always going to be monitoring electric vehicle conversations. All sorts of legislation dealing with electric vehicle infrastructure get introduced every year, and we're going to be tracking that very closely. Increased investments on footpaths and bike paths. So this is, we're monitoring discussions around Senate Bill 395, which relates to this issue. This is a bill pushed by a group called Street Trust, which is a nonprofit who works to promote and improve public transit, walking, bicycling conditions in Oregon. They've been operating, I think, since around 1990. And their goal with this legislation is to increase the allotment from 1% to 5% from the state highway fund for projects. And this is for footpaths and bicycle trails. So this was one that the legislative committee from Cherriots discussed extensively and decided to assign a priority to. So we're going to be monitoring that very closely and reporting back to Alan and the legislative committee on what's happening with that. So the last two things I'll mention, we always monitor TNC legislation, transportation network companies. like Uber, Lyft. And then we also track I-5 bridge replacement conversations. Even though that's a Portland, Vancouver issue, the I-5 corridor has an impact throughout the entire state for a variety of reasons, and it's something that any transportation entity should be tracking. So let's move on to the next, and I'll pause there for a second and see if anyone has any questions so far. It's a lot to take in one slide, and I apologize. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Waylon in a second here. He can introduce himself really quickly, and then he can talk about the COVID-19 transit impact. I already discussed a little bit the vaccine distribution plan, jumped it a little bit, but I want Waylon to spend a couple minutes talking about a couple things that could impact transit, and then we'll go ahead and close up and see if anyone has any further questions. So, Waylon, are you available right now?
Yeah, thanks, Dale. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Looks like it. Excellent. Well, thanks again for having me this evening. Ooh, I might have a little bit of an echo. I'll just work through it, but if you aren't on mute, I would definitely be grateful for you muting. So, as Dale said, I have a transportation background. I've worked for ODOT doing government relations. I've worked for private industry representing truckers. I've hung a shingle, done legal work, worked on campaigns, and I've worked inside the legislature as staff. So I bring a little bit of a mixed background. I'm definitely enjoying advocating on your behalf, enjoying working with Dale, the team, with Alan, especially on the Cherriots concept that we're bringing forward in the legislature. But tonight I just wanted to touch on a few brief legislative topics, as well as what Dale mentioned, the OSHA workplace infectious rules, rather the rulemaking that's been going on for months, but is now sort of evolving and transforming as we go. They're continuing to work, and by they I mean Oregon OSHA. They're working on permanent rules for workplace safety, and that's related to COVID-19. The current temporary rules expire May 5th. The larger business lobby was hopeful that these rules were actually going to be just turned into permanent rules, but that does not seem to be the case. And because the risk of infections is still likely to be present on May 5th, the division is rolling forward with rulemaking that's going to kind of allow incorporated revisions to what we've seen so far. So watching this, we saw labor advocates recently bring forth a proposal, and it would make significant changes to these draft rules. And some of them might have been stark as applies to transit districts. They were suggesting, for instance, face masks, or rather face shields, would no longer be considered appropriate PPE. Transit agencies would need to revisit how people comply with the 3 feet distance requirements. It would also require installation of clear plastic barriers, which I know is not necessarily a huge deal until you apply it to maybe smaller vehicles that maybe don't already have those in place. It would also require every effort to apply N95 masks across the entire workforce of public-facing workers. And lastly, it would require, if somebody tested positive on a bus, for instance, any vehicle, whether that's a passenger or an operator, they would have to let the vehicle sit idle on the road for 24 hours, and then a cleaning crew could be dispatched to that at a later time. And so, while most of these are made in the spirit of worker safety and best practices, it seems as if both the larger business community, some of the transit advocates, did weigh into OSHA. We had conversations with OSHA and Administrator Michael Wood, and ultimately OSHA has decided to not incorporate those labor proposed changes. They have declined to do most of them, and what we're seeing is a bit of a status quo as they adopt the rules with some minor tweaks and revisions. I would say most of the things that looked most significant to transit districts made it to the cutting room floor and are not going to be incorporated. So while we've watched that for months and things could change, it looks like they're going to maintain kind of the same posture that they have so far, and business and industry continue to really lobby them hard and make the case that these costs are too high based on these changes, and the goalposts keep moving. And so that's one of the main updates I wanted to have for you, at least outside of the legislative arena. Any questions on kind of how those apply? And I can't see everybody, so feel free to interrupt me if you do have a question. You won't offend me one bit. So hearing none, I have three other kind of samplers for you. These are the hot topics of some other items that we're seeing, and they could have an intersection with the transit world. The first is it's called PAGA, the Private Attorney General Act. It's commonly called that because California has a similar bill that they passed years ago. It's House Bill 2205 in Oregon. As drafted, it would allow private trial attorneys to file actions on behalf of the state for an aggrieved worker. And essentially that means instead of going to the state and filing a bully complaint or a labor violation, you could actually hire retain an attorney and they would sue on your behalf. Broad coalition of business and industry are going to oppose this. They're going to argue that the bill incentivizes lawsuits, fee stacking, over remedying injuries and making workers whole. And we have seen an uptick in the number of lawsuits that have come out of California since PAGA was introduced. So they are pointing to our sister state to the south and making the case that this is going to increase the number of suits that we're seeing. They also argue, and this is an interesting argument coming from the industry side, that Boley and our Attorney General do a great job of enforcing these statutes and that we don't need this type of fix. I would say the proponents of the bill, they're going to argue that empowering workers to bring suits against employers is vital when many employers bind their employees with mandatory arbitration agreements, or when the state lacks resources to go after companies that might violate Oregon labor laws. And so that's the teed up fight that we're going to see kind of play out on PAGA. The other issue that we're going to see is the independent contractor classification issue. We've actually seen this before. This time that it's called House Bill 2489. And essentially, when it comes to classification of an individual as an employee versus an independent contractor, it's really a critical determination because classifying them as either an employee versus an independent contractor creates a series of obligations on an employer, like paying for unemployment taxes, providing workers' compensation coverage, complying with wage and hour laws, paid leave, and a number of other items that you take on as an employer. As an independent contractor, you either don't pay into those programs or you cover yourself by paying into them. And you also do your own tax withholdings as well, so you take responsibility for that. Representative Holvey has introduced legislation that would create a rebuttable presumption that a person is an employee rather than an independent contractor when the question arises. So in essence, it sort of shifts the goalposts on the question of classification and it makes employee status the default, for lack of a better term, unless proven otherwise. I think we're going to see workers' advocates argue that this bill remedies a current problem of employer misclassification, that they allege that many employers do this intentionally to save money and shift costs to their workforce that they should be taking on, and it deprives workers of benefits. Employers are going to say that courts do a good job of enforcing existing laws. State agencies need to become more organized and have a clear criteria for how they determine who's an employee, who's an independent contractor. And so we're going to see that fight teed up again. I will say Representative Holvey is being sort of slow and methodic about how he rolls this out. He's done this 2 previous sessions, and when he faced significant opposition, he did table the issue and continue discussions. So I don't know if this is an item that they're rushing, but rather they're building work groups and having long discussions about this. So we're going to continue to watch that. And then the last one I have for you, it is an interesting one, and it has to deal with, I'll just call it workplace marijuana. House Bill 2974 provides that conditioning employment on refraining from any substance that's lawful in the state is an unlawful employment practice. So while not called out directly in the bill, what we're talking about is Oregon's recreational marijuana laws. They actually are amending an old tobacco statute and just inserting this legal substance language. And so Oregon's marijuana laws obviously make marijuana a legal recreational substance. So under this law, prohibiting an employee from using it during non-working hours, mind you, would not be allowed. It's not quite analogous, but it'd be like telling your workforce they're not allowed to drink on the weekend. That's sort of the result. For Cherriots, I would say that this poses a pretty significant federal-state law conflict on this issue because transit workers are CDL holders, operators that is. They're federally regulated by the US DOT, and so they'd be preempted, as would any safety-sensitive DOT-regulated position, and the bill would really only apply to the other non-DOT regulated staff, which is going to create a kind of a bifurcated workplace where you have DOT regulated CDL holders that have they're preempted, and this wouldn't apply to them. Everyone else could ostensibly use illegal substance during non-working hours, and employers wouldn't be able to take sort of any action on that. So it's going to impact workplace drug policies. It's going to be controversial. They have also brought this one multiple sessions in a row, and it's been a knockdown, drag-out fight that ultimately they had to table last time as well. So we're going to watch all these with interest and be reporting back as we learn more.
Thank you very much, Waylon. Really appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions on some of the bills we've talked about tonight? We're happy to chat further. We're happy to run down leads on anything else you have questions on as well.
I've got one question about House Bill 2489, so the independent contractor one. Would this be pretty similar to the one that the California Assembly passed recently and then was overturned by a ballot measure?
It looks similar, and I apologize, I didn't see who asked the question, so I can answer you directly. But AB 5 was the legislation in California. The most recent iteration of it actually created a carve-out or an exemption for a list of nearly 100 different types of business entities, and essentially had an A, B, C test, kind of a bright line rule that depending on the nature of control or the employee, whether they have their own resources or your resources, for instance, are they wearing your polo with your logo on it, or are they truly an independent contractor that owns their own brick and mortar facility and they contract with multiple entities? That was more a bright line rule with the Dynamex decision being implemented into California law. This is a little bit like that because it adjusts some of those same criteria. I think the biggest piece, though, is the presumption, the big burden shifting item that agencies are going to look at this new law in the context of if a classification issue arises, you assume they are an employee, and the employer then has to prove that no, they are actually an independent contractor. They have their own business, or they control their own hours, they have their own materials, and it becomes a defend yourself against the classification issue for employers. It's a little bit of a distinction, but it's pretty important. And I think presumption may be a common theme this session. We're seeing presumptions for workers' comp COVID-19 claims as well. So I think it's going to be a theme.
Is it fair to assume that this presumption could, to maybe put it bluntly, bring the ire of the very deep-pocketed TNC operators?
It's certainly possible. Anything can happen. I know they are represented in Salem as well, and so they would certainly make efforts to engage the lawmakers bringing this legislation. We saw in California they made strong efforts to carve themselves out. I would argue that the AB 5 legislation itself is a who's list of well-representatives down in Southern California. And so I think they would see the same tension here. Now, I'll wrinkle that or caveat it that some of the motivation from some of these legislators are the giant headlines and the giant court settlements from some of these TNC companies. And so they reference those in these discussions. So they are aware of those, and I think it's a factor.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for anyone on the team of CFM advocates? All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time and for all your efforts. It's wonderful to have such a powerful and equipped team to be able to represent us both in Washington and here in Salem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We very much appreciate it.
Okay. Next on our agenda is the approval of the transit.
Need a motion to approve.
Oh, we absolutely do. So with that, would anyone like to make a motion to adopt the federal and state legislative agendas? Director Carney.
I'll make the motion. I move that the board adopt the 2021 federal and state legislative agendas as shown in attachment A and B respectively.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second from Director Bush. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Ms. Galeazzi, could you do a roll call?
Okay, Director Bush,
Aye.
Director Carney,
Aye.
Director Hinojosa-Pressey,
Aye.
President Davidson,
Aye.
Director Krebs,
Aye.
Director Richards, Director Richards,
Aye.
Director Nguyen.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So as I was saying before, next up is the approval for the transit plan for statewide transportation improvement fund formula grant application.
Great, thank you. I'd ask Steve Dickey, our Director of Technology and Program Management, to present the staff report.
Good evening, President Davidson, members of the board. Tonight, we bring to you the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund plan for the biennium 2022 to 2023. As was mentioned earlier in the presentation, in 2017, the Oregon State Legislature passed HB 2017, establishing the largest transportation funding bill ever passed in the state of Oregon. Included in HB 2017 was the first ever revenue source dedicated to public transportation statewide. This funding source was named the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, or we've referred to it also as the STIF Fund. These funds are allocated on a biennial basis, and the next funding cycle is for the 2022 and 2023 fiscal years. STIF project plans, otherwise another name that ODOT has given to what we would more commonly call an application, were received from 3 public transportation service providers in Marion and Polk County, which is the area that Salem Area Mass Transit District has oversight of for this program. These plans include proposals for what they intend to do with the funding that was received in this area. And a summary of those projects as requested are in Table 1 in your staff memo. A copy also of the actual project plans with all the detail are in Attachment A. The most recent revenue forecast from the state of Oregon shows a total of $15,425,351 being allocated to Marion and Polk County area, split between 2022 at $7,510,636 and in 2023, $7,914,715. This all information is available for you and as well as the allocation to all areas within the state in Attachment B. The Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund Advisory Committee met on January 13th to review and make a recommendation to fund a list of projects in Marion and Polk counties for this biennium. The project plans as submitted did not result in the full allocation of the funding being used in Marion and Polk County. Due to the uncertainty of the local economy over the next couple of years, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund Advisory Committee made a recommendation to allocate all of the remaining funding that had not been programmed into each of those years to be placed in reserve funds. In the applications, if you go and you look at the applications, any revenues that had not been programmed would have been put into a category of what's considered what's called carry forward. And carry forward funds for a region are not available to the public transit service providers during that biennium. They only become available during the subsequent biennium when there's a new application submitted. So the advisory committee's recommendation was to keep these funds in a reserve fund for each of the public transit service providers in the event that revenues, local revenues fall short and there's a need for funds to maintain not only the service that was improved under the first biennium of statewide transportation improvement funds, but also during the last special session of the legislature, a temporary allowance has been made to allow for these funds to also be used to assist with operating expenses of services that existed prior to 2019. With this change, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund passed a motion to recommend that the board approve the list of projects and funding amounts identified in Table 2 of your memo. This memo includes the additional reserve accounts for each of the public transportation service providers, and that this table, or that this application be submitted to the Oregon Department of Transportation Public Transit Division for consideration for funding. Using these funds for projects will grow and improve public transit services in Marion and Polk counties and enhance the ability to serve the needs of our community. The purpose of the STIF program is to enhance transportation service throughout the state and provide a stable source of revenue to continue with those improvements for many years to come. Since this is a recommendation for the upcoming biennium, there is no fiscal impact in this current year's budget. So staff recommends that the board accept the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund's recommendation to submit the formula fund projects as identified in Table 2 for a total amount of $15,425,351. And that concludes my report, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Director Dickey? Director Bush.
Yes, thank you. It may have gone by me again, but the reason why we have extra funds was because there was extra funds in the fund that was not expected.
So at the beginning of this process, a target amount is given to Marion and Polk County, and then based on how the revenues are collected, which is tied to employee payroll taxes, a formula is developed to split that between the areas that are to be served by these public transit service providers. So in Marion and Polk County, in this case, it would be Cherriots local service, Cherriots regional service, City of Woodburn services, and City of Silverton services. When the applications were submitted and the applicants provided the explanation, the target amount that they were provided, that they stated that the reason they did not pursue the full amount was a concern that given the current circumstances that they could not put it into service immediately and during that biennium. The committee's perspective though was that those funds, rather than just carrying them forward into the next biennium, should be placed in reserve funds within their programs, so that those funds, if needed, would be available during that biennium. So it was the action of the public transit service providers being very conservative, but not placing those funds where they'd be readily available if needed, was what the committee then decided was a more prudent approach in order to make sure that those funds would be available if needed. If they're not spent, they are still available and will carry forward into the next biennium. So it's not a use it or lose it approach.
Thank you for that, Mr. Dickey. Yeah, the conversation during the meeting was very good. They were talking about, well, what about you and what about us? And it was congenial. Very good. Thank you.
Director Carney?
I'm glad that you talked about what the reserve funding was, because when I saw that both Salem Area Mass Transit and Woodburn were proposing to fund a reserve, I was like, is that typical? That seems odd to me. So I'm glad to hear that at least I'm somewhat validated in finding that it's a new funding source. My question is about House Bill 2017. And if you don't have this answer, that's okay. Maybe we can find it another way. But when they allocated funding for public transportation within that bill, is there any chance, because I looked at the city of Silverton and I said, wow, did they have anything before, or has House Bill 2017 allowed them to like spin up some transit? So what do you need to qualify as transit, or is this funding that could be used to create provision of greater transit service in places where currently none exists?
Well, to answer first the first question about Silverton. Silverton has had a service for a number of years, since the early 2000s, and it is branded as the Silver Trolley. It's a dial-a-ride service that provides just on-demand service to the, a lot of it is for seniors to access their community center, for individuals who want to access essential services, trips up to the hospital or to the grocery store and such. In regard to the startup of new services, the intention for House Bill 2017 is for there to be improvements in existing service, but also provide the opportunity for new service to be developed where there is not service before, which is why one of the eligible expenses for these funds is planning. So typically what you would look for is a new entity that would come forward would first initially look for funding to plan service, or if they had already done that, then bring that plan to support what they were requesting. And then as our part, as Salem Area Mass Transit, actually, and I should explain this a little bit, is we serve two roles in Marion and Polk County. We serve a role, obviously, that we have mentioned already as a public transit service provider, but the other piece that was established by statute is we function as something that they've characterized as a qualified entity. So there are a number of qualified entities. If there's a transit district within the county, then that transit district is the qualified entity. If a transit district covers more than one county, in our case, that would be Marion and Polk County, and TriMet, it would be Marion or Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. And then the 9 federally recognized tribes across the state. So each of those constitute what would be the qualified entity. Well, the responsibility of the qualified entity is once these funding amounts are made known, and ODOT has published a notice that there is an opportunity to apply for these funds, then the qualified entity has to publish notification that these funds are available. Now, there is a limitation on eligible recipients. They do have to be a public agency or a contractor that is providing services to a public agency that can provide these services that can apply for them. But so we function in a role that is governing and operating this program. So we do the call for applications, and at the same time we are an applicant. So even at the meeting, and Director Richards and Director Bush were at the advisory committee meeting, they observed that there was part of our staff, myself and Jolene White, our administrative assistant, functioned in that role of the qualified entity to run that meeting and to conduct that invitation for application and consideration of those applications process. Other staff came and were those that presented the applications on behalf of Cherriots Local and Cherriots Regional Service. And so in doing that, we were separating our roles, and even in our roles in the office or virtually in the office, we have made sure to keep those roles separate so that there's not a potential of influencing the applicant as a public transit service provider over those that are functioning that administrative role over the program.
My goodness, that was a more complicated answer than I was prepared for. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I don't have a question. I'd like to make a comment though, that the continuation of the reduced youth fare program, it's actually, so for a one-way ride, it's 50 cents. And I just wanted to note for the record that that is the same rate that we had back in 1998. And as a reminder of what was happening in 1998, we didn't actually have an International Space Station just yet. So I went to Wikipedia, and that was the one entry that seems somewhat interesting of what happened in 1998. I'm sure others will debate me on what was exciting when I was 9, but that is very cool. The cost of a candy bar when I was 9 was a bit more than 50 cents. And so the fact that we're able to keep the cost of a bus fare for our youth at 50 cents is wonderful. So thank you for that. If there's no other colorful commentary or questions, is there a motion?
I'll do it,
Please.
unless Director Richards would like to do it.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay. I move that the board approve the 2022-2023 biennium statewide transportation improvement fund formula fund program projects identified in table 2 for a total amount of $15,425,351.
I'll
Director Richards. Okay, Director Krebs, second. Excellent. Is there any discussion? No discussion. Ms. Galeazzi, would you call the roll so we can vote?
Okay. Director Carney,
Aye.
Director Hinojos Pressy,
Aye.
President Davidson,
Aye.
Director Krebs,
Aye.
Director Richards,
Aye.
Director Nguyen,
Aye.
Director Bush.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. So with that motion passed, we can move on to the general manager's report.
Thank you. So I think when I was 9, you could buy a candy bar for a nickel.
If only. Director Krebs is waving in agreement.
Okay, so I'm going to yield most of my time tonight to some guest presenters because I think that's more impactful for what we're going to share. So first off, as you all know, on New Year's Eve, we had a suspicious package incident. And over the last few weeks, there's been the potential for service disruptions. So I've asked Karen Garcia, our Security and Emergency Management Manager, to kind of brief the board on those two situations. So Karen.
Good evening, President Davidson and members of the board. Thanks for asking me to speak this evening, Alan. So as you know, 2020 has presented many emergencies for Cherriots to experience and grow. We've had a number of protests, demonstrations, rallies, and marches in the community, primarily at the Capitol, which is only a few blocks away. So in June, we had a number of events around the Black Lives Matter movement. In October and November, we were dealing with election protests and rallies. And then in January, the inauguration and the electoral college count and confirmation. All of those events have presented quite a few challenges for us over the last 7 months. But fortunately, these events have actually prepared us to quickly respond to unexpected events that can impact the service. So for many years, Cherriots has had an emergency operations center model for dealing with inclement weather. And so this is kind of part of our normal mode of operation. Every year, key staff sit down and review our winter operations plan. We update the plan and make sure that we're ready to go for the winter season. But you can always apply that emergency operations center model to any type of emergency that could impact our ability to provide service to the community. After every incident, we always conduct an after action review and go over all the things that went really well and discuss opportunities to do better in the future. So on June 6th, the March for Floyd happened in the downtown core. This was a very large gathering that started in front of the Capitol, but there was a planned march as part of that event as well. The planned march actually circled around the downtown transit center, and we knew that we would not be able to get our riders and employees and our buses in and out of the downtown transit center. So we decided the best way to continue to provide service would be to do a relocation during that march, which we did. And afterwards, we did a very thorough after action review, and we learned a lot of things. We had not had to relocate the transit service in a very, very long time. And so we did learn a lot of things from that event on June 6th. We were able to rebuild some relationships with our city partners, reaffirm the alternate locations that were available to us in the community, really identify our internal and external communication needs and methods, realize that use of technology is our friend when it comes to enhancing communications during emergencies. We have a One Call Now text alert application that we can send messages out through a computer to all of our key staff. We also use a messaging tool within our continuity of operations plan system that we can notify all of our staff members, operators, maintenance, administrative staff, everyone on the Cherriots team. We're able to get a message out to them quickly through a text message system. So on December 31st, we had a suspicious package. That was another unforeseen opportunity for us to practice our emergency response systems and plans. And I was actually on vacation on December 31st. In September, Jim Aguilar joined our team as the security coordinator, and he was on site at the downtown transit center when that suspicious package was reported to us. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim to talk about the details of what occurred on December 31st. Jim?
Hello, welcome. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Well, thanks, Karen, and to President Davidson for having us here tonight. So I'm going to try to quickly go over some details of that suspicious package incident that happened. It forced us to evacuate and move to our alternate location. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to jump in. I'll just try to go through the notes as we had them, as it chronologically happened that day. So that morning, it was obviously New Year's Eve. I got a call about 8:01 that from our security partners that are on our contracted security people that work out on the downtown transit center, who said they had received some information from one of our passengers, which was the first step in many of the really good things that happened that day. That we had an alert passenger that was kind of keeping an eye on things and saw an individual exit one of our buses, acting in a suspicious manner with a backpack that looked like it was pretty heavy. They described that the individual was looking around as they were approaching a trash can, looked around several times before they carefully placed this backpack that would look like it was in fairly good shape and new in fashion and didn't appear to be something that somebody would readily want to throw away. They watched as this person looked around and then carefully placed it into the trash can that is basically in the middle of the center island. It separates the two bus islands in the middle. And this was at a point when we had a pulse in and there were lots of folks milling around out there, and we had people getting on and off buses. The passenger felt strongly enough about this, which is one of the great things, is that they approached one of our security folks and notified them of what they saw. They approached as ironically as it would be our brand newest of new security folks that had just been there for probably only minutes on duty that day, and really only within his first couple days on shift. He was trained enough and smart enough to pass that information on to the security supervisor, who has a law enforcement background, very smart in the security world, and went through her process of kind of elimination of whether or not this is something that was, somebody left behind, or if it was something that we could plausibly say that there was a reason for it to happen, which is when we do these investigations, you really want to try to eliminate, or bring up reasons that this could have happened logically. And if you can't logically put something together that somebody, in a common sense way would want to do something or act in a certain way, then that's when things become suspicious in nature. So she did that very, very quickly. The initial report came to her at around 7:50, 7:52 in the morning. I got a call at 8:01 after she had done some quick investigation, looked at some video of the person getting off the bus and the way they acted, confirmed that the passenger had seen exactly what she had saw on the video is exactly what was described by the passenger. She then called me. I reviewed video very, very quickly, confirmed what they had confirmed, and I headed from my office on the fifth floor of CH2 down to the transit center, to the actual area where the backpack had been placed. I looked in it. I have a fairly lengthy law enforcement background in emergency operations and tactical operations, and I quickly confirmed that this was something that I wasn't willing to put my hand in and shake around or unzip or look inside. And when you get to that point, if you're not willing to do it, it's my position that I'm not going to ask anybody else to do that. And if I'm not going to ask anybody else to do that, then people shouldn't be around it. So we quickly made the determination, or I quickly made the determination to contact our ops supervisor that was working out on the mall, and told him that we needed to evacuate the transit center. And aside from seeing the size of his eyes get to be about 5 feet wide, and say, he understood the gravity of what was going on, and the fact that we wanted to err on the side of the safety of our passengers and our folks that were operating the buses. And I think it's also important to note one of the things that was that time of the year, we had just a week prior had the RV incident in Nashville, where the guy had touched off the explosives in Nashville. And oftentimes in our world, in the law enforcement security world, there are a lot of follow-up examples of that kind of stuff that happened in the world. So given everything and the gravity of what was happening, I made the determination that I didn't think that it was safe for us to have people around until we could have some further professional help and resources deployed down there. Our ops supervisors did an incredible job very quickly of maintaining control, being very, very professional about how they went about it. This could have easily created a lot of more havoc than it did. It was only because of the way that our staff acted that people kind of just in orderly fashion moved all of our transit operations out of that transit center downtown to our alternate location in just a few minutes. I think when we were sitting down looking through our notes, it was by the time that we got the call, I made the call to evacuate, we had everybody off of the transit mall in probably 10 to 12 minutes. And then they were set up at our alternate location at Bush Park within 15 or 20 minutes after that, and we were running buses out of that. So it was just an incredible turn of events down there to see that folks were able to operate in such a quick fashion. I think it goes back to what Karen was talking about, the previous kind of dry runs that we've had through some of these political events and some of the things that have happened recently, that our staff just did a really, really good job of just creating another business environment at a different location, and continue to provide the world-class customer service that we're known for at Cherriots. So as that process was happening, simultaneous to that, our security staff was securing the downtown transit center. I was working on notifying the minimal staff, which was lucky for us on a New Year's Eve within the Courthouse Square building that we had this event going on. So we notified Marion County Facilities, who then started their notification of the folks on floors 2 through 4. And there was a little bit of communication issues between the two law enforcement agencies, Salem PD and Marion County Sheriffs, in the evacuation process of the building, but that worked out fairly quickly. It's a unique situation that we have at Courthouse Square with having multiple jurisdictions involved in that building, with Marion County Sheriff's Office Judicial Services across the street responsible for the security for their side, and then obviously Salem PD responsible for the security and safety of our folks on our side. But after a short bit, we were able to get that worked out and get people situated where they needed to be, either out of the building or on the proper side of the building. We then deferred to Salem PD as they arrived on scene and gave them the information about what we had. They conferred with their hazardous device team, which again was a lucky thing for us. We're out training that day, so they were readily available in South Salem to come up. And having supervised that team in the past, I know that it doesn't take very much for them to say, "Okay, come, we're going to check something out," because they have lots of cool toys and things that they can use to do that stuff with. So they responded very, very quickly to our location and took our information that we had, the pictures that we had taken, and they did confirm that we had made the right decision, that it was something that needed further investigation. They were able to use a lot of their robotic instruments to be able to do their investigation. So they had 2 robots that were able to extract the backpack from the garbage can that it was in. And then they had a second robot that was able to independently X-ray that backpack out on the island as it was extracted out of the trash can. They were able to determine at that point that more likely than not, what they were seeing on the X-ray was something that wasn't explosive related. They then made the determination that they could approach it and open it. And they opened it and found that it on New Year's Eve, which still is baffling to me, that somebody left 6 unopened beers inside that backpack. And so that was what was inside there, was 6 cold unopened beers on New Year's Eve, which we were all wondering how we could split at the end of that whole thing while we were dealing with that stuff. But it really spoke to the combination of resources that we have with everybody. Our notification process that Karen talked about, to be able to quickly notify people via our One Call Now, our marketing staff that was able to quickly be able to get stuff changed on our social media sites, and the way that they're able to communicate with people. They were able to get that information out to our customers. We did have some customers that were, as the buses were just quickly pulling out, were for all intents and purposes, were stranded there for a little bit. Our ops supervisors recognized that they needed to get those folks, and were able to get a shuttle bus movement of folks that were coming to the transit center to catch a bus, and figured out that they weren't able to get it. So quickly they were able to establish a place where they could go and catch a shuttle bus down to where the operations were happening down at Bush Park. And so it was just really, from my standpoint, people really just did their jobs really, really well that day. There wasn't a lot of questions asked about why we were doing something or why we made the decision. People did the professional thing and got our staff and our customers to a safe place, and then resumed business as usual from another location. So it really for us, it really proved that we can take our operation and do it in a professional manner in a different location, and really have very little impact to our folks who need the service as badly as they do. So that's pretty much a quick overhead rundown of what took place. They did clear the scene, and we were able to then have to do everything in reverse, make the notifications to folks that we were moving our operation back to the transit mall. They were able to finish the last pulse at the Bush Park, and then we're able to transition back for the next pulse. I think we started our service at 11 o'clock back at Downtown Transit Center. So in the scheme of things, we initially got the report just before 8 o'clock, and we were able to get everybody out and then everybody back in by 11 o'clock with no injuries, no substantial impact to our riders. And I think it really shows the resilience of the organization to be able to continue to provide the world-class service that we want to those out there, even in instances where we have to move our entire organization to another location. So from my standpoint, I thought everything went really, really well, and our staff proved that that they have the ability to do these things and react and change and move and continue to provide the service that we need to the community. Anybody have any questions for anything specific on that you may have heard or saw or heard about that we can answer? Yeah, go ahead. Director Bush.
Thank you. I just want to comment on from the time that I saw it on Facebook and I shared it out to my social networks. People had wonderful comments on how quickly Cherriots responded, how professional it seemed to them, and there was a lot of gratitude for keeping the community safe. So thank you very much.
Yeah, there's no problem. I think everybody did an outstanding job for sure. Any other questions?
I've
I
got,
think I'll go ahead.
I've just got one question, but first, kudos to everybody. I think you guys handled that wonderfully. Yeah, I really want to stress that you guys did an excellent job. But do we have any sense of what that person was thinking?
So no, the one as I watched the video afterwards, we were able to pull the video from the bus that he was on. My through what I believe was happened is I think the guy stole the backpack from somebody, and then he was on our buses and figured out what was on it, and then in the backpack because he actually got off the bus twice. Got off the bus once, walked to the garbage can, which wasn't seen by anybody out there. He got back on the bus, looked at the backpack again while he was on the bus, and then got back off the bus again and took it over and put it in the trash can. And I think that it appeared to me that it may not have belonged to him at the beginning. He took it from somebody and got on the bus, looked inside, and it was something that he didn't want, and then took it and put it in the trash can. And we never were able to identify him enough where law enforcement could catch up to him and ask him what was going on. But from my perspective, I think it was something where he had taken the backpack from somebody and didn't know what was in it until he got on the bus and then figured out that it wasn't something that he wanted to have.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I would just add, it was pretty awesome to watch all the moving parts and things just happen. When we talk about Team Cherriots, that's the perfect example of people just making things happen and getting the job done. So well done there. Next up, I've asked Chris French to come back on and talk a little bit about how we're helping one of our partners, Salem Health, in their mass vaccination site at the fairgrounds. So Chris.
Thank you. President Davidson, members of the board. So I'm here to talk about working with Salem Health and the vaccine clinics. So they had reached out to the district, and myself and Sue Ann Coffin were requested to meet with Salem Health, which we did on the 19th to kind of find out what they were needing as far as assistance or how we could work on transportation to those clinics. On the 21st, we did a site visit. Myself, MV, the contractor for Lyft, and myself, we went out there and saw how they were planning the operations for having our Lyft vehicles come in and what we could do for service. We worked with them to for routing for the Lyft vehicles to get in and out of the facility without being tied up in the general line of traffic trying to get into the facility. Established pickup and drop off areas so that we had safe locations to drop off passengers from those buses. And then we looked at what we could do for getting a bus closer for the fixed route service. And the Route 13, we were able to make a detour and only miss one stop for that service and be able to provide a stop right in front of the Jackman Long. We worked with them to make sure that they routed traffic to keep the 17th open for the fixed route bus, routing traffic through other directions onto the fairgrounds and out of the fairgrounds. And then we also worked with them to establish times, because when the lift passengers are getting dropped off there, it's a long process, and so we don't want to strand people there. We don't, and so we established that we would take reservations for the clinics until 1 o'clock, so that we would have time to make sure that those people would get home. We're still evaluating that process, and we may expand that. And there's also Salem Health. We are not involved in the appointment process or any of that. So if people have already established an appointment that is outside of that time, we are accommodating those trips, but we're asking if they call us first to try to set up a trip. We're working to make sure that they try to do it earlier in the day, so that we can make sure that they get home, and they can run out of vaccines throughout the day. So we don't want those people going later in the day and then being there and not being able to receive their vaccine because they've ran out. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for Manager French?
All right, thank you. I think this is an important thing we're doing with one of our community partners, especially to help people with mobility issues get vaccinated. You know, when they first opened up this clinic, all the pre-registration was done while people were waiting in their cars. So for people who were going to get there by paratransit or by bus or by bicycle or walking, really didn't have a registration process. So I think this has helped them look at not everyone moves around and gets there by car. So, and as they open up the vaccinations to more and more people, this will be an important option for people to get vaccinated. So I'm happy to be partnering with Salem Health on this. Next up, I'd like to introduce our new Director of Operations, Tom Dietz. He's been on the job 2 weeks. So last week he was faced with all the potential service disruptions with the inauguration. And then this week we had a little bit of snow and adverse weather conditions. So I'd like to ask him to maybe introduce himself and give us a little update, some feedback on our actions around the snowstorm. So Tom.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm a member of the Cherriots team. I can just further give examples of how excellent this team performs. So we had a little snow earlier this week, and as we were meeting, doing our daily business, noticed that it started sticking. Immediately put together a modified emergency operations center protocol, pulled all the resources together, and immediately started to address the issues that were in front of us, which included 6 stuck buses that happened relatively quickly. And we got on that, created 8 detours, got great communication out, and so that everybody understood that we were doing the best we could, and to please be patient as we got these buses back on the road. Facilities jumped in and we started spreading ice melt and kitty litter for unsticking buses, getting buses chained out on the road so that we could get them home, and then pre-chaining buses in the event that we would need them in the morning so that we would not miss pullout. But all in all, we recovered just a little bit after 9 o'clock in the morning, and got back to business as usual.
Great, thanks a lot, Tom, and we're happy to have Tom on board as part of Team Cherriots. And then my last comment, so COVID-19 has, one of the disappointing aspects of it is that we can't properly recognize people when they deserve to be recognized when they're retiring. And we have a person tonight who next week is retiring from Cherriots, and that's Al Mccoy, our Director of Finance, CFO. I'd like to thank him for his service not only to Cherriots, but to the transit community as a whole throughout his career in several different states. And so would like to ask Al to maybe if you'd like to say a few words to the board, since this is his last board meeting as a part of Team Cherriots. So Al.
Thank you. The conversation earlier tonight was, I guess, very fortuitous. It took me back to when I was 9 earlier. So when I was 9, I went from a very country upbringing on a vacation with my family to New York City. And we went to the World's Fair. And it was the very first time I had experienced public transportation because we caught the subway out to Queens to go to the fair. And from that point on, I was hooked on, it was always, I loved it. So I have spent probably almost 3 decades of my career in public transit. And before that, it was in nonprofits. So I want to say thanks to Alan for the opportunity to serve the district and for his leadership. And I want to thank the board and the budget committees, all the committees that I've worked with. I've had some great interactions with the members of the boards and committees, and I appreciate the insightfulness, the questions that the current board poses. Gives me great hope for the future of Cherriots. And I want to thank the executive team that I've served with because they've been very welcoming right off the bat. And I think we've served well. I am going to miss Cherriots. It's been a great job. Wish I'd found it 10 years ago. But, you come to this fork in the road at a certain time in your life and you have to make a decision. So I'm looking forward to a new chapter. I'm going to take a deep breath for a little bit and focus on myself. And then we'll see what I can offer again to the public as a volunteer.
Great, thank you. I think you're getting some virtual applause there. Yeah, great. Thanks for those comments, Al. And that concludes my report.
Great. Thank you very much, General Manager. Next up on the agenda are the Board of Director reports. And so as usual, I'll direct your attention to page 99 in the board packet. And we'll go sub-district by sub-district. And Director Nguyen, if you have anything to report on.
Yes, the DEI committee has been very busy as the RFP to go out for our strategic plan consultant is live, and we even had our first Q&A session, and I'm thankful that Dan is here. Apologies to Director Bush due to having quorum or concerns for having quorum. We were not able to have you join, but in case there's any questions on process, Dan is here to support.
Okay, if there's no other questions, Director Bush.
Thank you very much. I want to say again, thank you to the legislative committee team, Director Carney and President Davidson for your hard work in that. And you can see how impactful and important that kind of work is for not just us, but also on the state and federal level. So, and many things that I've been a part of this past month are with Cherriots. Whatever we do, it connects out. And every time I go to an event, the connecting people with places tagline is very important there. Whether it's at the greeters or a city council meeting or another event in the community. And I've attended quite a few of those. A couple of them I just want to highlight. I really appreciated the SEDCOR awards last month because they highlighted many businesses in the Salem area, well, in the Valley area, that had to pivot because of COVID and had to do things differently. Just so many to mention. It was a very encouraging meeting. And one of my favorites was the the business watershed. They normally make rain gear for first responders, for park rangers, and they pivoted and made the isolation gowns for Salem Health that could be reused. So that was fantastic. Another thing that I wanted to comment on was the retirement of County Commissioner Sam Brentano. He's been instrumental in many things in our community, and a transportation advocate for so many things, and saying so long, farewell. It was hard, but in his place, the county commissioners welcomed a brand new Danielle Bethel to step into those shoes, and she took off running. So another one that I attended was Salem for Refugees meeting, and they announced that there's a new welcome center for our new members of our community coming in, and they're going to need housing, and one of their team members is in charge of their transportation. And I know that we partner with them in helping our new community members learn how to use Cherriots with our ride training programs, and Lisa Kerrigan is excellent in leading that up. New counselors were sworn in at Kaiser City Council, as well as at the Salem City Councils and throughout the area. I'm looking forward to working with them as we go forward. Another partner that we work with is United Way, and they reported at one of the Kaiser Greeters events. Stephanie Bob talked about their response with the wildfires, with helping in this pandemic, all the food boxes that they deliver, and their response at the fairgrounds. So normally we donate bus passes to them so they can distribute them out to the community. But with our fares being free, that's not part of it right now. But the partnership in many areas is great. I attended the Special Transportation Improvement Fund Advisory Committee meeting and the Public Transportation Committee meeting, and listened to those two different levels about the unifying or combining of the two committees, the Special Transportation Fund and the Improvement Fund, eventually down the road. So listening to the results of the funds tonight by Mr. Dickey was icing on the cake. So Commissioner Cameron was a host at one of the Woodburn Greeters, and he welcomed Commissioner Bethel as well, and just really talked about all that they are doing as an entity. And we are also connected with our commissioners. We're connected with the Mid-Willamette Area Commission on Transportation. And one of the most impactful meetings I went to was the presentation by the Oregon Fair Housing Council of Oregon. And they gave a history of housing since before Oregon was a state, before people came even to the United States, and how inequity was happened because of historical events, one people being pushed out of another area, and so the housing, and I had not known or connected all of those pieces and how they ended up the way we are today in our housing. And as we're looking in our plan that we talked about, that Chris French shared with us, that's going to be very helpful information for us so that we don't make the same mistakes of the past. So I'm looking forward to new things and great things for Cherriots. And thank you. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Director Bush. Director Carney?
Always a tough act to follow. This month, I was not able to attend my neighborhood association meetings, but I have high hopes that I will next month, because I think we will be able to again have evening care in our home, because all of our kids are either in daycare or now in assisted distance learning with the YMCA. So that is it's the first time we've had an empty house in 15 months at least. It's been quite a ride. But I was able earlier this week to attend the SCATS meeting. And at that meeting, we had a transportation impact study presentation by Shane Witham from the city of Kaiser, talking about different kind of scenario planning exercises they had run to help illustrate and understand the impacts that different types of growth would have in Kaiser, were Kaiser able to expand. I think the transportation impact study is sort of a look at what it might be like for Kaiser to have a distinct urban growth boundary as opposed to one that they share with the city of Salem. Right now, the city of Salem is only able to really grow out to the south where we have room to grow, and the city of Kaiser is pressed right up against what they have in the north without much ability to expand at all. So this transportation impact study sort of looked at a couple of different scenarios, just helping to envision what growth, if expansion were an option, would look like in Kaiser. So that was pretty interesting. And then I think the two bigger items on the agenda, because that was an informational piece, was the SCATS 2021-2022 Unified Planning Work Program. So provide feedback to SCAT staff on the Unified Planning Work Program. And they were nice enough to indulge a lot of questions that I always have about all the things that they bring up. But one thing that caught my attention in their Unified Planning Work Program was the different points at which local entities had most recently updated their transportation improvement plans. And I know for the city of Salem, it's fairly recent. For the city of Kaiser, I think is behind that. And then when we look at something like Marion County, the last adoption for that was 2005. So they have a 16-year-old transportation improvement plan, and regional, and what's the RTSP? I might have to ask for help on that acronym, but some very outdated transportation planning documents underpinning this. And I just wonder if we as a board need to think about if and whether that makes it difficult to work with these partners at a local level. If they have such outdated planning documents, does that hinder our ability to deliver good service? So just something that came up in review of that. And then finally, Karen Odenthal talked the committee through the annual listing of federal obligations and why we have difficulty getting, let me see if I can articulate this clearly. Colleen, you were there, so if I get it wrong, maybe you can steer me back on, and Director Krebs was as well. We have more federal money available to us than we spend, I think is basically what it comes down to. And we have failed year after year after year to do this. And so we are on like a stepping path with ODOT guidance on how we can actually receive and invest all of the federal funds that are available to us. And that was all really that took place at that meeting. I did, as Director Bush mentioned, meet with the Legislative Committee earlier this month. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Carney. Director Hinojos-Pressey.
I don't have anything to report this month, so I will pass it on.
Thank you. So I'm up next. The first thing I'd like to mention is that I will be appointing Director Hinojos-Pressey as an alternate to our Salem External Committee. So that's City of Salem's Comprehensive Plan Update. So she'll be joining Director Carney in that effort. So thank you, Director Hinojos-Pressey, for your willingness to serve. My first report is from the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. So they just recently hired a new executive director. So as a reminder, the Council of Governments is a consortium of, I think it's 46 local government entities, Cherriots being one of them. And so the name of the new executive director is Scott Datson. I have not had a chance to meet him just yet, but I know our general manager.
He hasn't started yet.
Oh, he hasn't started yet. That would be why. General Manager Pollack served on the recruitment committee and was involved in the recruitment there. He comes highly recommended. He previously worked out back east in Virginia and the Carolinas, and right now he's working for it's Isothermal Regional Commission, which is another regional government based in North Carolina. So I think he'll bring a lot of value to the Council of Governments, to the COG. So I'm excited for him to hit the ground running. And then we also discussed the legislative agenda for the Council of Governments. And with Director Carney's help, she and I made some pretty detailed recommendations on how the Council of Governments should consider organizing their legislative agenda. And I am very happy to report that they were open to those suggestions. And so what was like a 6 or 7 page document is now 4 or 5 key items, which I do not recall right now, but I promise that they are good items and they're not things that we would have any issues with. One thing of note is we are, as a Council of Governments, prioritizing recovery in the Santiam Canyon. And so that, along with the normal ensuring that there's not an expansion of unfunded mandates, are some of the key areas that we as a Council of Governments are focusing on. And one other piece that is maybe interesting to the group is that I advocated for the Council of Governments positioning themselves both with MWAC and then also SCATS to ultimately receive what I expect to be federal funding to support the reduction of greenhouse gas intensity of our transportation sector. Right now, I think there's improvements that we could be made there, but with money coming down the pike and with climate action almost certainly coming, I think it would behoove us to prepare ourselves so we can take advantage of that kind of money. And that's something that the Council of Governments is interested in, and staff is looking into seeing what kind of changes might need to be made there. In terms of the Mid-Willamette Area Commission on Transportation, we met earlier this month and we reviewed the stiff discretionary applications. Among them were the 2 that we reviewed as a board, I believe in December, which was the South Salem Transit Center and also the small buses, some of those more micro-transit, nimble buses. The group was interested in supporting that. There were a couple other transit projects that were not Cherriots projects, but were received good support. So it's what I would estimate to be a somewhat convoluted process. So I am unclear at what point we will find out whether or not things are funded, but I know that they are in good hands, and it goes to another review committee, but I believe it's a statewide committee at that point. We were the regional review committee. Now it goes on to something statewide. So I'll report back on that as soon as I hear. And then the other item that I wanted to mention that's not explicitly transit related, but is tangentially related, is that this Saturday, my wife and I will be participating in the point in time count that the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency is putting on. This is an annual count to attempt to get an accurate number of our neighbors that are unhoused. And this is a really important service that we as a community can participate in, because if we don't know who these people are, if we don't have an accurate count, we cannot serve them adequately. So that's something that my wife and I will be doing this weekend, and just wanted to put that out as a plug, that if you have availability, whether to serve in this point in time count that's occurring this week and this weekend, please consider that. But also if you have time or resources to assist in the longer term, please consider doing that. So with that, I conclude my report. Director Krebs.
Oh, thank you. I've had a few meetings this month also. I attended my Morningside neighborhood meeting, and one of the good things coming out of that is it appears the developer is going to improve part of Reed Road, and that goes through an area where they're building several hundred, in fact, probably 1,000 living units in that area. And we a few years ago looked at putting a bus on Reed Road, but its geometry is just not safe at this time for even large vehicles. So that's a good feature, and hopefully in the next year or so they'll have Reed Road finished. So as we redesign South Salem, we'll be able to look at that. I've attended a number of transportation advocacy group meetings. The Oregon Rail Users League and the Light Rail Transit Association and other organizations. And I was a co-host on a webinar this last weekend, talking about intercity passenger services. And that is about most of the stuff that I've done this week, but it's been pretty busy. So I will pass it back to our director.
Thank you. Director Richards.
Well, I've had an exciting week this week. It's been very varied. The first thing that happened was I had worked on a group that was working with the Costco move, which we had fought dearly, but it's going to be moved. And I was interested because the people there said that it is a real problem, as heavy as the traffic is already, and then to have it extended probably 5 or 6 times, they're going to need some way to get those people. And they're wondering if anything the Cherriots group could do to set up so that these large firms out there that have 2,000 people in there will have some way that they don't have to depend on their car, and that's what they were talking about. The next thing was fun. I work with Northwest Senior Services, and they had 4 old trucks that we used to deliver our food packages, as well as other things that people need. And I got to go help buy 5 trucks last week. And the last thing I did was I got involved with the VA. I'm a disabled veteran myself, and the group in Portland was taking all the virus sample, or the virus stuff they were going to use, and they didn't do anything about the people in Salem. So 5 of us went to Portland and tried to convince them that we need a unit like that. And I don't know if it'll do any good, but working with the government, you know how that can be sometimes. But anyway, it was very varied, and I had a lot of talks with some people that I had not met before, and I'm going to give them my card and tell them, that I hope I can help them, and maybe I can pick up a few new neighborhood groups. The neighborhood groups are very active in my area, and I read them almost every night. So, but it's been a busy week.
Great. Thank you, Director Richards. With that, that concludes our Board of Director reports. And so that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much to everyone that attended, and thank you to everyone who prepared wonderful presentations, and for everyone's attention. I know it's been a long meeting. So with that, we're adjourned.